Hello and welcome to the Sleep Matters podcast from Dreams. Everything you need to know about how to get a great night's sleep and why it matters so much. I'm Dr. Pixie McKenna, and in this episode we're chatting about the impact that stress has on our sleep, and then in turn the stress that results from the lack of sleep, as well as sharing tips on how to combat stress at work. I'm joined by Professor Marc Jones. Welcome, Marc.
Hi.
And Marc is a professor at Manchester Metropolitan University, and he's an expert in understanding the causes, the control, and the consequences of stress and emotion. So definitely much needed here today. And we have Graham Allcott. And Graham, welcome. Graham is the author of a number of books on productivity, such as How to Be a Productivity Ninja, something I'm very interested in.
Indeed.
And he gives masterclasses and presentations on how to be more productive and how to reduce stress. So before we get started with stress and sleep, how did you sleep last night?
Not bad, actually.
Good,
yes.
yeah.
I can't say anything else, though, can I? That's the thing. It wasn't a bad night's sleep at
Not
all.
about what would
Bit of an early start.
All right.
Yeah.
How many hours, or just
Yeah, I think 7 hours, which is not what's needed. I know that, but not bad.
good? How about you?
Last night was very good, probably 8 hours. The night before I was in a hotel and was terrible. So that's my one weakness, is being away from home, being out of my normal bed. That's when I struggle with my sleep.
You like your own bed. Do you
Yeah.
like your own bed, or
Yes.
you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could sleep anywhere, actually. I could sleep on the floor. I'm a good sleeper. But it does make a big difference, doesn't it? So we're all reasonably sparky today then.
Yes.
Yeah,
Good,
we're well
good,
rested.
good.
Yeah.
So I suppose a good opener for discussion really is stress. How would you, as it's your field of expertise, how would you define stress?
Well, it's a good question. Anybody who thinks it's a field of expertise suddenly starts to go, well, that's actually pretty complicated to define stress. But I think broadly we're talking about situations where I guess the demands, the situations that we face will tend to exceed some of the resources that we have to cope with those particular demands. Now that's a good explanation, I think, applies to lots of different situations, whether they're acute stresses, so having to give a presentation, doing a driving test, examination, through to some of those more chronic, long-term life events where things happen to us that we feel a bit overwhelmed and are not sure how to cope with it. The one flip side to that is some of those demands that we're faced with is we can respond to them in a positive way. So they can be quite a positive response to stress, what people have termed eustress. So we can do things that are, put ourselves in situations that are quite demanding or quite difficult, but actually we see it as a bit more of a thrill, or we see it as a challenge, and we are motivated to try to rise to that challenge. And I think the interesting thing about stress is the very individual nature that it has across people. So the types of things that people find stressful differ across us. So some of the things that you would do, I think I couldn't possibly do that. And some of the things I might do, you think I'm not sure I'd like to do that. And also they can change over time as well. So sometimes we think we're able to deal with things, and then over time our resources might get depleted. For example, if we're not getting enough sleep, or we're not looking after ourselves or giving ourselves enough chance to rest and recover, and then we're less able to deal with some of those things that in the earlier time we were able to deal with.
But I think it's everywhere. Stress is everywhere. I see people all the time in my clinic and they're stressed. People I know are stressed. Everyone's stressed. Are you stressed? I mean, you're a productivity ninja, so you should not be stressed.
Not right now. I mean, of course, so Mark was saying there about particular situations. I was really stressed running a half marathon a few weeks ago. And that, for me, was a very demanding thing. And so your brain's going through all these thought processes of, I shouldn't be doing this. Why don't you just stop now? And you have to kind of push through that kind of stress. Thrill seeking is another way that people get stressed. And I think even when you have your work really under control, there are stressful moments and situations in the work that we do, right? So maybe it's a conversation with a colleague that you think is going to be a really awkward thing to talk about. You might feel threatened. I think stress at work can come from a number of different places.
What would you say? I mean, you're obviously the stress expert. So do you feel that you're a stressed individual?
I think we all get stressed at some points in time and some periods of time, but I think in general I would see myself as being a pretty relaxed individual, but recognizing that there are times in work or in our personal life where we do experience periods of stress. I would just like to follow on from one of those points, though, in terms of stress is not necessarily in and of itself negative. Now, we can have negative responses to stress, but stress can be a powerful motivator. It can be a powerful energizer. So when we're put in situations, if we think about some of the definitions of stress as the body's non-specific response to a demand placed upon it, it's really an energizing effect. It's there to enable us to deal with something. And one of the challenges with stress is where we are continually asked to respond to things over time, then that can lead to some types of chronic stress, and it can affect things that are important for us, such as our sleep patterns as well. But I think it's important to remember that stress is not necessarily in and of itself negative, and periods of stress are normal, and the body has evolved a mechanism to deal with some of those demands that are placed upon us, and that's perfectly natural and normal for the body to respond in that way.
And what about our productivity then? Because how do you think that maybe my stress, your stress, everybody's stress, how's that impacting their day-to-day productivity?
Well, I really like that thing about the stress being challenged. So sometimes you can come out of those stressful situations, and if something's gone well and you felt really stretched and really pushed the limit, but then you've pulled through and you've achieved what you wanted to achieve,
like your half
then
marathon.
That can be a really great thing, right? Like the half marathon. But also, when you do get up and give a presentation, if it's the first presentation you've ever done, you feel terrified beforehand, but you feel elated afterwards. And so the payback that you can get from some of those very stressful situations, I think, can be quite good. But then I think on a sort of day-to-day level, finding ways to deal with the negative aspects of stress. And, for me, a lot of it is about really recognizing the patterns that you have. I think so much of our habits around our work and around productivity are unsaid and unseen. We tend to have the same kind of morning routines every day. We have very similar sort of methodologies in the way that we work. Maybe we always start the day with email. Maybe we always have meetings at certain times. Certain things just happen in a rhythm. And because of that, you don't necessarily notice which ones of those things are the things that are really causing you the negative kinds of stress that are actually really going to affect you through the day. So I think a lot of it for me is about how to help people to be much more aware of those base level habits, and that will help people to then deal with some of those patterns and kind of change some of that behaviour.
I've heard before that with regards to that whole type of productivity, and exactly as you said, we're sort of almost hardwired. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. This is how I've done it, always done it, I'm not going to change. That some of the most successful and productive people actually have sort of mantras where they do emails for half an hour at the start of the day, the middle of the day, the end of the day, not like the rest of us going, we're on the loo, we're looking at.
Right.
And that actually, by doing that and by structuring your I guess your stress levels or putting them in different times of the day, really enhances your productivity. I've never tried it.
Never tried it. Well, I have. So one of the things I try and do is I keep the mornings much more free for what I call create time. And then the afternoon is where I get onto email and messaging and what I call collaborate time. So me as an author, as someone who's writing books, as someone who's developing courses, a lot of my work, it's more successful if I'm uninterrupted, if I'm on my own, if I have kind of deep space to be able to think. And so all the things like email and WhatsApp messages and social media and all these things are just going to get in the way of that. So the thing that I like to try and do is just be bounded around the timings of that. So the mornings are much more about me and sort of delivering that creative work. And then the afternoon is about me helping everybody else to deliver their work. So that's when I'm in emails and meetings and all that kind of collaborative kind of side of the work. So I kind of try and structure it like that. For some people, it might be you don't need the whole morning to be doing that creative work, but you maybe need an hour or half an hour. And then you need to just be boundaried around how you deal with certain types of communication. So again, I think it's one of those things that because, if you've never set up a boundary around email, for example, because you have no boundary, you're going to be in email all the time. And you're going to end up multitasking, which in the 1980s in time management books was seen as the holy grail. And now it's a complete fallacy. If you're doing work that is involving adding value and creating value out of information, if it's thinking tasks, then you can't think about two things at the same time. It's impossible. It's just a very inefficient way of working.
Women multitask all the time.
I think you can multitask when one of the things is not a thinking task. So I can multitask when I'm washing up and thinking about something, or if I'm on the hold queue and I'm typing, that's fine. But actually trying to switch your thought processes around two different things, I think is a really inefficient way of working. all the studies kind of point to that. So I think
and a stressful way of working, really.
Very stressful, and you're actually much more likely to let something fall between the cracks or make an error on something if you're working in that way. Deep focus is the thing that is at such a premium in the way that we work these days, because we're all in open plan offices, we're all connected to so many different communication devices. It's such a premium, but also the most valuable resource that we have is our thinking and our attention. So how you get into that deep sense of focus is, I think the most important part of productivity.
I just want to pick up on what Graham says there, actually, because it's spot on in terms of lots of the work that we've done with companies and individuals. We started going to talk about stress, and interesting, in the back of some of that work, people came back and talked about email. They were saying, actually, the work isn't any harder than it was 10 years ago. It's just the pace of work is much greater. And in particular, email, and that's where some of our research has gone, is a big driver of that, because the power of email lies with the sender, not the recipient. And you can see all different types of working practices where even if there's a spoken norm that we don't need to email outside of work hours, the unspoken norm in terms of the behaviours of the leaders and the colleagues that you work with drives people into situations where they very rarely get to switch off. And they're engaged in their work habits, after they leave their work to go home. And what's really interesting is that when we look and talk about recovery and rest and recovery, that when people have explored the effect of 2 weeks holiday on rest and recovery, yes, you feel better after you have your 2 weeks holiday, but that tends to dissipate very quickly. What really matters is being able to switch off and relax on a nightly basis, that we get those periods of rest and recovery on a daily basis, and not that we work really hard for 2 to 3 months and save up our rest for our holiday time.
Absolutely.
And I suppose with the whole stress and that whole thing about being connected to your email all the time, that has a massive impact on your sleep ultimately. I mean, lack of sleep is one of the signs of stress, isn't it?
Well, you see all sorts of comments, like a third of Britons will get up and check their emails in the middle of the night. There'll be many people watching and listening to this who will check their emails last thing at night before they go to sleep.
Be checking their emails now.
Checking their emails now, and that's understandable, of course. That's understandable. And then first thing in the morning when they get up. So you have that period around sleep where you're checking your emails. And one of the difficulties with emails, of course, technology, it's not necessarily bad in and of itself, though you could talk about the blue light and the effect that might have on sleep patterns, but it's potentially what arrives through that technology. So it could be something you think, I have to deal with that tomorrow. Or you read a social media post that gets you a bit angry, you think, I really disagree with that. And so it's that stimulation, if you like, that makes it then harder to switch off and relax when you want to get to sleep.
I think if you've got emails anywhere near the bedroom, you're always going to lose.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're having that final check of emails before you go to bed, you're losing, because even if there's something there that you see that you think I need to do something about, you can't do anything about it because you're about to go to bed, and it's just going to play on your mind. And if you then first thing in the morning check your emails, then you're going to lose, because what you're doing is you're starting the day with everybody else's to-do list, not yours. What is email? It's everybody else's to-do list, right? So starting your day that way puts you off focus, takes you away from the real thinking that you need to do about what does my day need to look like for me. So I just think, separating emails and keeping them as far away from the bedroom as possible, I think is a really useful tip.
It's interesting that you say that, actually, that you're losing when you look at the email before you go to bed at night, and you're losing when you look at it in the morning, because most people would think, God, I'm great, and the boss is going to think I'm brilliant, because my husband been sending emails at 6:30, thinking, I've logged on, But that's a really good concept, I think. You're already on the back foot because you've probably ruined your night's sleep, or you've really stressed yourself out before you've even got into the office or started whatever you're meant to be doing for the day.
Yeah, and I guess part of that comes about because people want to appear like they're switched on all the time. People want to send those emails, like your partner kind of, late in the evening, say, look at me, I'm online. And people notice that email and the time that's written against it. And what is never noticeable is people getting really good rest and relaxation so that they're really ready to go the next day. There's just no public forum for that, is there, unless people start taking photos of their sleep and sending it around and all other impossible things. So because it's unseen and unnoticeable, then it becomes, the thing that people don't choose.
I just wanted to pick up on one point in terms of sleep and email. And some of the work that I've done has been with athletes, and that's where I've done quite a bit of work, and they'll talk about pre-performance routines. So just to follow on in terms of some of the points around a sleep routine. So one suggestion is to have a pre-sleep routine. So an hour beforehand, you make sure that you turn off all those devices, that you're engaged in relaxing activities, and that'll help you then much more likely get to sleep a bit quicker. But this behaviours that we engage in, where we're doing lots of things busily and then going to sleep, makes going to sleep a lot harder.
So you're better off to get all your stuff done and then sort of reboot for an hour, rather than get all your stuff done and fall into bed, because you won't be able to sleep. For people listening who are thinking, they're not particularly productive, or they might be stressed, what sort of signs what for you would be like the key things that you see when you go into workplaces and when you work with people in terms of the cardinal signs of stress?
So I think one thing to think about stress, we can think about it in terms of our feelings, so how we are feeling. We can think about it in terms of our behaviours, in terms of whether we're irritable with the people that we work with, and maybe our personal relationships, whether we have difficulty concentrating, whether and then also in terms of our behaviours. So people who are stressed often engage in coping mechanisms that paradoxically are not then helpful in enabling them to relax. So people tend to drink more, eat more, drink a bit more alcohol. We know the effect that alcohol has on our ability to get to sleep and the quality of our sleep. So it helps us get to sleep, but the quality of sleep that we have after a couple of glasses of wine is much worse than we would have had we not had that alcohol, because alcohol, as you know, is a sedative, and so we go to sleep, but we get these little micro awakenings after we've had a bit of alcohol to drink. So it's about our feelings, it's about our behaviours in terms of our irritability, in terms of our ability to concentrate and how we interact with people, the behaviours that we engage in, and of course there are physiological changes that happen when we are stressed, in terms constriction of the arteries, because cortisol is being released, and we see all of these physiological changes as well. So.
And in terms of our productivity, how, if I'm feeling stressed, how is that going to sort of translate into my lack of productivity? I'm unlikely, I think, if I'm hugely stressed, to be incredibly productive.
Yeah, I think so. So I think all of these things feed each other. So if you can reduce stress, you'll improve productivity. That will actually help you to sleep better. And then that sleep will also then drive productivity. I think all these things are really linked. I would say that if you notice that you're spending a lot of your day on email, if you're having a lot of those thoughts that feel like I'm just the victim here, and I'm just being thrown all these new things to do, and starting to feel like you're powerless in that situation, I think that also for me is a sign of stress. And often when I work with people, that's a really noticeable shift. They'll start by saying, I've just got too much to do, my bosses must hate me because they're giving me all this stuff, and then by the end of a day working with them, they're saying, I feel in control, I feel like I'm empowered to have the right kind of conversations around this stuff. And all that's really changed is thinking. They've just spent some time doing some detailed thinking about all those different projects they're working on, all the different actions that they have to do, and by the end of that, you can start to see that world in front of you, if you like, all those different projects and actions, as here's the data that I'm now working with. Whereas if you don't have that sense of data, and it's all just in your head, then you just feel a bit like you're out of control, like you're the victim. And I think control is something that is very linked to stress. If you feel under control, if you feel like you've got a really good handle on things, if you feel confident, then that's likely to reduce your stress as well.
And in terms of, I guess, the link between stress and sleep, I suppose we all know we don't sleep well when we're stressed, but in terms of the physiology and what's going on internally, can you just walk me through that? Because we all know I'm wound up, I'm not going to sleep, but what's our body doing internally?
Well, so if we think about our physiological reactions to stress, it's about the release of adrenaline, it's about noradrenaline, it's about cortisol, it's about preparing our body for action. And preparing our body for action is not commensurate, is not ideal for actually relaxing going to sleep. So we're talking about high levels of activation, increased heart rate. If we're worried, if we're ruminating on things, it becomes hard then to relax psychologically, particularly if we're worried about things that might be related to our work or our personal life, and we're running through those things in our mind. That's why the old cliche of how to get to sleep, you count the sheep. And it's a way of occupying the mind and distracting you from some of the things that you might be thinking of. And the link between stress and sleep is fascinating because it works both ways. I never understood, when parents would point at children, the children were behaving really badly and they say that they are just tired, until I had children myself. And then you saw the effect of being tired on the child's ability to regulate their emotions and make good decisions. And it's there sort of in a child in a perfect form. But we experience that as well. So when we lack sleep or when we haven't slept particularly well, we are more prone to respond emotionally the following day. So if we lack, if we don't have enough sleep, we respond with much stronger emotional responses to emotional events or emotional things that happen or emotional stimuli the following day. Because the link between the prefrontal cortex, which is the bit that kind of regulates our emotional responses and our behaviours and tells us how we should behave in that situation, is less effective in terms of dealing with our emotional responses after we've had a poor night's sleep.
It's a good comparison, I guess, with the kids, isn't it? Because, they're like little tyrants.
Unbelievable. And I never realised
we're like that as well.
Children myself, yeah.
Well, we're like that, you're
just
like...
a little bit better, though.
Yeah, a little bit better, I don't know. But we
yeah.
don't feel that we're like that. We know we're tired, but we don't really appreciate that we're grumpy or we're not productive and that. Yeah. So, I mean, what would your tips be on dealing with stress in terms of, what should we be doing?
Well, big question, because there are lots of different ways. And I think Graham made a good point earlier. It's about individuals and about recognising what causes them stress. So, I think there are lots of ways that we can regulate our emotional responses, our stress responses, and people will have different preferences as well for the types of things that they would use. So there's lots of good evidence that, for example, engaging with nature and being in natural environments has a positive effect on regulating our emotional stress. So when we go into natural environments, it has a stress-reducing effect. Physical activity is another good way of regulating our stress responses, notwithstanding running the half marathon. Social support is a very powerful way, and having good social connections is a very powerful way of being able to regulate our stress responses. We respond better to demands when we feel supported and when we feel we have those good social connections that better enable us to deal with those demands. So having those good social connections, you'll know from your medical work about the consequences of loneliness and the effects that has. There's also different strategies to be able to deal with acute stress. So when we're faced with a particular demand, how do we manage that? And there are three things that we tend to focus on in our sporting work, in our sort of performance environments, and they're about confidence, control, and an approach focus, of thinking about what you want to achieve. So changing the way that we think about a particular stressor and the instructions that we give other people can have a positive effect on the way that people respond. We've looked at that in our research. It's not just psychologically, but physiologically. The way the body responds to stress differs if we have a focus on confidence, control, and thinking about what we have to do, not what might go wrong. So there are many ways that we can deal with stress and many strategies. So some people like to come home after work. They like to do a bit of cooking, listening to music, go for a walk, go for a run, engage with nature, interact with people socially. So lots of different ways that we can manage our stress.
And in terms of our productivity, if we are very stressed, what would be the best thing to tackle if you're a stressed person and you're feeling your productivity is sliding?
Yeah, I think the first thing to do is get all the stuff that you're thinking about out of your head. Right, so in whatever way that looks like.
That might take a long time.
Right, so you can either just do that with pen and paper and just write that down. There's some really good apps that you can use. And what these apps do is allow you to really get all those thoughts and actions just out of your head and into a place that you can start to then move them around, tick them off, manipulate them, categorize them, all that sort of stuff. And so by being able to see all that stuff in front of you, that will lead you towards that feeling of control and that sense of perspective around what you're doing.
I think the writing is a really good example. It was a very nice study that was done where people at the end of the day would write down 3 things that went well that day and the reasons for them. They tracked that over 6 months and they found that actually that had quite a positive effect in terms of positive mood. So just taking that time to reflect on some positive things that have gone well and the reasons why. I think writing also works in another way as well. People have done studies of people who've kept diaries will tend to have better psychological and physical health than those who do not. There is something about writing down your thoughts that means that actually the emotional part of your brain, the part of the brain that has these ruminations, these worries and the concerns, has actually been listened to, and that you've actually taken some time to think and deal with. And there is something about the act of writing that means that actually that those issues or worries or concerns have, in a sense, not been dealt with, but been listened to, and that's enough.
I have a gratitude journal, but I'm so disorganized half the time I can't find it. When you were speaking about lists there, I don't know if it's a disorder, but I have like listophobia.
Oh,
I
really?
just
Okay.
hate lists.
Yeah.
And when anyone mentions writing a list, I just get really I don't know why, because I am very disorganized. So actually what I need to do is embrace the list. I don't know, I've got something about it that stresses me out.
Scrap those bits then.
So imagine I'm listening to this now and you know, I'm thinking I'm really, really stressed and I can't sleep. What would you say? What would be the top 3 things that I should be doing? Well, I can't sleep, and actually I'm kind of thinking maybe I can't sleep because I'm really stressed.
I'm tempted to go for the list again, but I'm only joking. I mean, it depends why you're stressed, but I think one thing I would say that often it's work stress, so it could be things that are happening in our work. So I think that ability to transition from work to home is an under-neglected area. So we think about having a shutdown ritual at work. What do we do when we come home? Is that we transition from one space, which is our workspace. What role does the journey have when we go home? So in terms of things that we can do on the journey home, examples of gratitude that make us feel better. So we're de-stressing from our work environment. How we greet our loved ones when you come into the door, a 3D greeting. We look at them in the eyes, we say something, we touch them, we give them a hug.
3D greeting.
How often would you go home and just throw your bag in the corner and not say anything? So there's just a way of connecting at home with our loved ones. Now, of course, flexible working is a bit of a norm, so we might engage in some work, but having a shutdown ritual before sleep. You asked me to do 3 things, I'm probably giving you about 20 at this point. But then it would be into, there are different strategies in terms of breathing techniques, in terms of relaxation techniques. Keeping a journal where you write things down or any worries or concerns might be a way of dealing with things that you're particularly ruminating with. But I think certainly engaging in things that take your mind off some of the worries, some of the things that are stressing you, so activities and hobbies and things that you might do, whether it's cooking, things that engage you cognitively as well as physically, can be ways of switching off. So switching off doesn't have to go back and going and doing a breathing technique. It could be going back and taking the dog for a walk, doing the cooking, doing something else that detaches you from what might be causing some of the worries. And there are lots of techniques that would depend, because we're always after techniques, not the causes necessarily. Yeah. And I know you just want some techniques in this instance, but there are some techniques that you might want to do beforehand. But that shutdown ritual before you go to sleep, in terms of laptops off, emails off, relax into sleep, have that shutdown ritual would be something that would be helpful. That was probably about 25, was it, I think?
Yeah, I wanted to mention one thing that we've not really covered, which I think is very much in and around the same wheelhouse as stress generally, which is caffeine.
Yes.
So generally when you get stressed, you're having more of that time. Perhaps, if you're a smoker, you smoke a bit more. And if you're a tea or coffee drinker, you probably drink a few more of those caffeinated drinks. And I think, caffeine has quite a long half-life and stays in the body. So thinking about maybe having a cut-off point during the day where you say, after that point, I'm going to drink decaf coffee, or I'm going to drink fruit teas or something else. So, sometime early in the afternoon, make that the last coffee, and then don't drink coffee for the rest of the part of the day. So as you then get in the evening and the caffeine's going out of your system, that's going to allow you to sleep better. And I think, often we sort of neglect that as being something that is going to have that effect. We kind of know that it wakes us up in the morning. We don't necessarily think about the long half-life that caffeine has within our system as well. So I'd think about that, and then also, as Marc was saying, the kind of breathing techniques and meditations and those kind of things can be really helpful. But just like leave the phone in a different room. I think if you can do that, that's also going to make a huge difference. So, putting the phone on charge in the kitchen, moving the charger there is always the thing that is the first step to then changing that habit and making it happen.
Somebody always takes the charger though, and then that causes huge stress. Well, thank you very much. That's been really interesting. I've got a 3D greeting. I've got something I want to do that I'm going to light myself up. I might even start writing lists. I'm in. I'm convinced. Thank you for watching the Sleep Matters podcast from Dreams. If you enjoyed it, then please press the like button below. And if you want to see more, then you can subscribe to this series.